Denis Villeneuve's Dune is one of my favorite science fiction films and one of the best films I've seen in many years, and it's super easy to comment on how awesomely big it is, how vast the production design is, and how overwhelming all the visuals are, because that's totally true. But my favorite thing is actually super small, and it's not a scene, a character, or an image. It's an editorial tool. And it's at this point that I'd say, if you love Denis Villeneuve films, then you also love the work of editor Joe Walker. And it's their creative partnership that has created some of my favorite moments in 21st century film. From the incredible highway shootout in Sicario, to the haunting, dreamlike pace of 2049, and the mind-blowing looping story of Arrival. But even with all that, this one little gag is something I'd put up next to the greatest moments in editing history, like this one, or this one. Because with Villeneuve and Walker, editing isn't just about making things flow well. The editing of Dune embodies what Dune is saying. The two major superpowers in the film are the voice and Paul's ability to see the future through the spice. Villeneuve and Walker have chosen to use the same editorial technique to visualize both for the audience. And that, combined with the things that are literally being said on screen when it happens, shows that they understand that these concepts, while they seem unrelated, are actually different aspects of the same thing. And instead of explaining it to the audience, they let you experience it. Let's take a look. Multiple times you see flash forwards to possible futures as Paul inhales the spice. But now let's watch when he uses the voice.
Give me the water.
It's the same technique. Paul uses the voice, Jessica sees a possible future wherein she moves the glass, and then it cuts back to real time, where she chose not to move the glass. Now, the phrase, "give me the water," in a movie where water is heavily symbolic, is strong enough. But let's take a look at the scene with the Reverend Mother and the box of pain. Paul walks in, and immediately the Reverend Mother uses the voice on him. He sees a vision of himself inevitably walking forward. He resists it, and makes a choice to stay standing. But what were the words she used? Who are you? Because they use the same tool to get across both ideas, the entire movie can be wrapped up in a simple sequence of cuts like that. So let's take a minute to unpack everything that is implied by what these sequences mean and how it lines up with the story of the film. Thematically, Paul's challenge is largely about choice. In the opening of the film, Paul, like many teenagers, feels like he has no choice in his life. In fact, his first line is to symbolically complain about this.
Why do we have to go through all this when it's already been decided?
Paul knows he will be the next Duke after his father, even if he doesn't want to be. Even though he sees him and his family trapped by the machinations of power all around him. And in that context, even the motto of House Atreides takes on kind of depressing tone.
We are House Atreides. There is no call we do not answer. There is no faith that we betray.
Translation, we will do what we are required to do, regardless of what we want, because we're locked into the forces of history. And on his mother's side, it's even worse. Paul learns that he himself is only another link in a chain of a 10,000-year-long breeding program by the Bene Gesserit to produce a super being. So the best he can do is follow the steps that have been laid out for him in this prophecy. This is something that Villeneuve is clearly interested in, and in a way, he kind of makes the first half of this argument Blade Runner 2049, in which Ryan Gosling thinks that he is the one, and that makes his life special, only to find out that he's just another random Joe. Initially, he's crushed by this, but then he comes to understand that being part of a prophecy means that you have no freedom at all, and that real meaning comes from within you, and your choices about what you believe is important. So in Dune, Paul starts off knowing this much. Prophecy is a trap, and the weight of history pressures you into having no choice. And in the film, the symbol of this is the voice. The sound design for the voice says it all. It's not just using the voice of the actor who is speaking, but also the voices of all of the other Reverend Mothers throughout all of history. It locks the listener into a single inevitable action. The force of history makes a choice for you, and it's very difficult to resist that force. But when Paul gets to Arrakis, he's immersed in the spice, and it has the opposite effect. The spice reveals that in actuality, in any given moment, you have an infinite number of choices. Now, at first that sounds like freedom, and Paul is kind of mesmerized by these beguiling glimpses of possible futures with a beautiful woman from Arrakis. But it quickly turns out that having an infinity of choices before you is just as terrifying and overwhelming. This is the so-called tyranny of choice as described by Barry Schwartz in Scientific American. We think that total freedom makes it easier to direct our own lives. But in reality, the more choices there are, the more quickly we're overwhelmed by them, and often, against that, we give up our ability to choose. And when we don't choose, the choice is made for us. The weight of history wins again. So Paul ends up feeling just as trapped by the future as he does by the past. But it's when he and Jessica are being thrown around wildly in the Coriolis storm, which is basically symbolic of the uncontrollable forces that rip their lives apart, that Paul has his most important vision. One where he learns this from a character named Jamis, who he hasn't even met yet.
The mystery of life isn't a problem to solve, but a reality to experience. A process that cannot be understood by stopping it. We must move with the flow of the process. We must join it. We must flow with it.
No, in fact, he's going to end up killing Jamis instead, symbolically cutting himself free from even that locked-in path. And now, the lessons from the past, from his mother and his father, combine with a lesson from the future, and they say the same thing. Instead of being overwhelmed by anxiety about the future or depression about the past, be in the moment and choose your own path. Power lies not in history or destiny, but right here in the present moment with you. So the question the film is asking of Paul is not, what have you done with your life? Or what will you do with your life? But rather, right now, in the moment, who are you? That is understanding what you're saying with your goddamn movie. Denis Villeneuve and Joe Walker's Dune.